Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. So if it looks like I'm wearing the same outfit as the last video I posted, it's because I am trying to do as much pre-filming as possible so I have a good stock for when I'm away on my honeymoon so that I can still get videos up when I am gone. So just be warned, that is happening. I usually try not to do that, but that's definitely happening. Anyway, if you have watched my recent Twisted Retreat unboxing, you're gonna know about this book today. So this is Holy Ghost Road by John Mantooth. I have never heard of this author before this, but this was a Cemetery Dance publication release, and I really like Cemetery Dance. That's Richard Shizmar's publishing company. And this was an exclusive edition from Twisted Retreat. It is a beautiful copy. I love this inside flap. This inside flap is just stunning. And then you get this barn. And then obviously it has this. And then we get this back, and I really don't understand the cactus because this book takes place in Alabama. And I don't, as far as I know, there are no deserts in Alabama. I could be absolutely incorrect, but I don't think there are cactus out there. Correct me if I am wrong. Anyway, very beautiful book. I'm going to read the inside flap for y'all very quickly. So it says, some roads are haunted by the past, some by ghosts, some are even haunted by demons. The one Forrest must travel is haunted by all three. When she discovers Pastor Nesmith praying to a demonic entity in her family's barn, Forrest knows she must run. Enraged at the possibility of having his true allegiance exposed, Nesmith pursues Forrest as she flees on foot, hoping to reach the one person who will believe her, her grandmother. Unfortunately, Granny is 40 miles away, and Forrest has no car, no phone, and no friends. To reach her, Forrest will have to learn to see the world true, even as the demonic and the sacred wage war for her soul. So this book had one of the coolest openings I've ever read in a novel. I was like fully gripped for the first like 30 pages. I was just like, oh my god, this is such a high-paced start to a novel. And I really loved it. I was so excited reading the first couple pages of this book. And I know that some people complained about how they don't like how the book seems to start like in the middle of the story. Like, a lot of people I noticed said that the book felt like it started like 40 pages into the novel. And I actually didn't mind that because everything that happens before the opening of the novel gets explained to the reader, and I think it's explained very well and in a very good pace. And just kind of sets us off running, and this whole story is like a run to the finish line. And the book even has this really actually quite helpful little map in it that I used to reference throughout the story. The setting is super creepy. It's just kind of these like backwoods, back roads in like small town Alabama, basically filled with various barns and Dollar Generals and gas stations. And I really enjoyed the setting, and for the most part I actually really liked our main character Forrest as well. I was so hooked in this book for the first like 50%. I was on board with what was happening. It was kind of really developing and creating this like really cool character narrative. And then we got to the midpoint of this novel after we have had multiple chases, multiple run-ins, multiple how do I say it without ruining what's happening? Multiple run-ins with like demonic and or powerful energies. And I was there for it. I was really there for it. And then we get to this kind of like conspiracy of what everything actually might mean and how all of the people in the town are affected by it. And then we kind of dig more into Forrest's past. And I feel like the midway point in the novel, which is also conveniently like the midway point in the map, is where the story really loses itself for me. Because all of a sudden, it starts to get very redundant. We have all these instances where Forrest and people she meets along the way, it's like confrontation, run away. confrontation, run away, confrontation, run away, narrow escape, narrow escape, narrow escape, over and over and over and over again. And the story kept repeating itself almost to a T, where it would be a close brush with death, a phone call to somebody kind of comes out of nowhere and saves you, and then repeat, you know? And this happens over and over and over the course of like 7 days. And there's a lot of like biblical references in this novel, so I feel like that was definitely intentional. But the pacing also started to slow down because I knew what was happening. I started to understand this kind of, this pattern that the author was using and this formula that he was following for all of these scenes. And it just started to get more and more and more redundant. And then, halfway through the book, Forrest does something that always bothers me in horror stories or survival stories or end-of-the-world stories. And I don't want to ruin it, but if you've read it, it's going to be the introduction of the character Edie. And this is the same problem that I have with A Quiet Place. When you introduce that type of character willingly to your dilemma, you just create more problems and put yourself in more danger. And it's one of those things that, like, it just didn't feel necessary. Like, I don't understand why the author added it. At least the addition of that type of character in the Quiet Place franchise makes sense because it builds upon, like, the characters of the story and, like, their own trauma and what happened to them at the beginning of the book, like, or the beginning of the movie. I understand why that decision was made, but in this novel, introducing Edie the way that Forrest does to her narrative, to me, is almost like a deliberate death sentence. And it just felt very, very dumb and in a weird way, like, short-sighted. And so I didn't understand that entire storyline or plot point because it felt unnecessary and just a way for the author to add more challenges for our main characters. The other issue I had with this novel was basically the entire character of Elijah. He worked to be a very good, like, character development foil for Forrest. I loved their opposing views on things. I kind of loved, like, their need to trust one another. But at the same time, Elijah is a shady, shady, shady character who does some pretty unforgivable things time and time again. Again, this book becomes very formulaic, like, it just happens over and over. And, like, we as the reader are just supposed to kind of forget that he does that. And Forrest is just supposed to continue to overlook certain things. And to me, that was just a glaring plot hole. And even as it was happening, I was like, are we really supposed to believe these characters? Are we really supposed to side with these characters, making these awful decisions one after another, after another, after another? Like, after the second half of the book, after we get to the midpoint of the book, like, these characters, again, become extremely formulaic, extremely redundant, and just make more and more and more and more dumb decisions, and just continue to not learn anything. What I will say about the book that I thought was interesting is that the twist got me. I don't think I saw the twist coming. I feel like looking back on it is very obvious, and I probably should have. But I enjoyed the twist. I thought it was a cool twist. I thought it was fun. And then we get to, like, the actual, like, ending, which to me felt very anticlimactic. You know, you have a whole book about running, and then obviously to end a book with running, there has to be a finish line or a final stand. And it was just so underwhelming to, like, the great start of this novel, the amazing launch of this novel just went up and then went right down. It was a overly complex ending, but at the same time extremely simple. Like, it required the reader to understand a lot about these kind of, like, occult energies, while at the same time not being given a lot to understand them. So it was definitely weird. I have a lot of unanswered questions about just barns in general and how they operate, and about her grandmother and Ruby Jewel. There's so many characters, and Helmet. There's so many characters that I just feel like I don't have answers on, and I would have loved to know more about the lore behind this occult force that is driving this entire narrative, and I feel like that is completely glossed over. And it's just something that I felt like the book was really, really missing. And then we just get to the very, 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 very last scene, and it was just like depressing and rude and jarring, and just made me feel like none of our characters learned anything. And I really, really dislike when characters kind of stay stagnant, even though all these things happen to them that should make them and elevate them, you know, make them evolve and become different people. They kind of remain the same. And I feel like John Mantooth really tried to at least do that with Elijah, but I feel like he was incapable of doing that with Forrest. I just feel like she was so set in this way from the beginning and stayed that way. And then once I get through all of that, there's this whole story, this whole side story, I think his name was Ben, about Forrest's brother, that is just strewn, it's just spread out throughout the entire narrative. And it's this big question of, well, what happened? And we have no answers. No answers. And that drove me crazy. And I was like, is this supposed to be like a spin into a sequel or something? Because it felt pretty self-contained. You know, it's a very atmospheric book, and it's very setting driven. It's very, very, very much driven by the location of the story. But we just didn't get an answer. And like, maybe we sort of did. Like, you could argue that maybe it's there, but it's vague and it's unclear and it's not definitive, and I wanted definitive because we're just teased with this plot point the entire story, and then it's never answered. So that bothered me. This was a 3-star read for me because the first half really gripped me. Like, I would definitely read something by John Mantooth again, and the way he was able to write this setting was so well done. It was so creepy, and it was so vivid, and I could see it and be there. But there was so much to it that was introduced but never fully fleshed out, and then left open-ended, and that drove me crazy, on top of the redundancies of everything. So 3 stars. Beautiful book, really interesting concept, very like heavy religious undertones, which I wasn't expecting with this type of narrative, but I did really, really love the first half, and then just kind of forced myself to finish it to see how it ended. But yeah, I would read more from this author. Hopefully his next book will have more of a concise, straightforward concept, and he won't introduce as many things and then kind of like redundantly follow through on different plot points. But I don't know, happy to be introduced to this author. Not overjoyed with this novel, but it didn't suck. It didn't suck. The ending was what it was. But the beginning of this novel was really, really well done. It could have been a short story, just the first 30 pages of this book, and I would have been like, wow, that's amazing. Anyways, that is all that I have for you guys today. As always, I try to post every Monday and Thursday, sometimes on Saturdays, and if you enjoy these videos, please hit the like and subscribe buttons down below, and I will catch you on the next one. Mwah.